Hellhounds, hellish supernatural dogs from folklore, usually found in mythologies across the world. Black fur, glowing red eyes, supreme strength, and ghostly figures. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and let's listen to four people who have heard the howl of the beast. The black dog with red eyes. When I was between 10 and 11 years old, my family was going through an extremely rough patch. My parents were breaking up and life wasn't a happy one for anybody. I remember the last night my parents were together, a terrible fight broke out. Pots were thrown, screams and cries echoed through the house, and what seemed like the longest night of my life at the time had settled in. I walked into the room that my parents were fighting in, crying and begging them to stop. They did, and after some cuddles and stuff, we all went to bed. The next morning, I remember it was a bright day, sunlight streaming through the window, in front of my bunk bed, which was shared by me and my older sister. I woke up alone. I believe my sister was asleep at the time, and she didn't see what I saw. But as my head raised, I looked to my left towards the window. Standing not 30 centimeters from my face was the face of a big black wolf-like dog with glowing red eyes. We stared at each other for a good 5 seconds or so before I got too scared and shoved my face down into my pillow, wishing for it to leave me. At the time, it scared the shit out of me. However, the more I look into it now, the less scared I become. I relate myself to a dog quite a bit too. I used to pretend to be a dog when I was younger. They are my favorite animals. The black dog with red eyes and fiery breath has been listed throughout the world in folklore tales, mythology, spiritual beliefs, and reports. Generally, it's related to death, either as the guard of the underworld, or the Hound of Baskervilles, or Anubis, the Egyptian god. And it may very well do, but then it may also represent a death, maybe not a physical death. The night before I saw the dog was the last night my parents were together. Ever since, I had been fascinated with the origin of sighting. I'm not sure what all of this is worth, but I'd love to know if more people have seen this dog or know more about it. I'll end with this. I am reminded by this quote I once heard a long time ago, but it seems to ring true in so many terms. That which we fear as a child, we find comfort in as we grow older. Mom and brother. My mother and brother both had ghost stories about the huge black dog with glowing red eyes. They were both born in Warren, Arkansas. I am the only one born in California. It seems that in both stories, they were out late at night. My mother was still a young woman then, and she was coming back from visiting someone when she thought she saw something standing in the road in front of her. When she moved, it moved. She said it was tall like a horse, but it was a dog with red eyes. It frightened her, so she got off the road and ran home. My brother, also a young man at the time, had been out partying with friends, if I remember correctly, when he also encountered a huge black dog. It seemed to be laying in the middle of the road, which was like a cross. As my brother approached it, it seemed to rise up and grow taller and taller. It was the size of a tall horse, but he was sure it was a dog. It had red eyes and it stared at him. My brother said the breath was knocked out of him as he stood looking at this thing. Finally, just like my mother, he started running. He He jumped over a fence and went home around the back way. It did not follow him any further than the fence. But just like his mother, he never stayed out past midnight down there again. Everyone moved to California by the time he was 10 years old. So, I believe he was visiting relatives when this occurred. I thought maybe he just remembered Mom's story. He and I were born 15 years apart, and I can only remember hearing this story maybe 2 times each. My brother's story struck me the most because there was still fear in his voice when he told it to me. It was a warning. Beast in the Shadows. I know that this seems kind of out there, but I swear that it's true. When I was a kid, my sisters and my mom and I lived with my grandparents. The house itself always felt safe. One day, our neighbors got a new dog. It was an average-sized black dog. But since I was a kid, I guess it seemed bigger. My neighbor and I were friends, so we played a lot together, but his dog never seemed to like me. Every time I would go near the mesh fence, the dog would start to growl and show me its teeth. So eventually, I stopped going to my neighbor's house. But at night, I would hear it barking at stray cats or other wildlife, and it would freak me out because it would sound so close. The dog was frightening to me. I just sensed something dark about it. Then one day after school, I had heard from my mom that my neighbor's dog had died that morning. I was sad for my neighbor, but a little relieved. The rest of the day went by like normal. But that night, things got very strange. That night after I fell asleep, I had strange dreams about that dog. In my dream, the dog was still alive. It had jumped the fence and started to attack just me out of everyone in my house. I remember being so terrified. I woke up, freaked out. Then I heard a noise at the side of my bed, and I turned to see what it was, and it was my neighbor's dead dog sitting next to my bed. I can still remember those glowing solid yellow eyes staring at me. I started screaming, but I couldn't move. It's like my body was paralyzed by the dog's stare or something. After what felt like hours of horror, my mom finally rushed into the room to see what was wrong. As soon as my mom got to the bed, the dog growled and backed into the wall, leaving only its head and front legs exposed. And then it just melted into the ground. My mom asked me if I was okay, and I asked her if she saw the dog. She told me that she didn't see it. She assured me that it was only a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't. I was fully awake when I saw the dog next to the bed. I never saw the dog at that house after that, but as the years passed, I knew that its presence was there at times. I lived in Georgia very briefly one time, and while I was there, I went to a psychic. I didn't actually tell her about the dog, but she told me that my intuition is strong, which I agree with. Sometimes I just know certain things, like who's gonna call or come ring the doorbell, or more recently, I have noticed that when I let my mind wander at work, out of nowhere I will start seeing certain TV programs in my mind, and sure enough, when I get home and turn on the TV, the same program is on. I'm not saying that I'm a psychic, I just think that the dog is somehow tied to my intuition. I have seen the dog recently. I live in Austin, Texas now, and almost a week ago, I was talking on my phone while walking home around 3 in the morning. Then I looked to the house at the end of the street, and I saw its shadow against the white door of the house. I could clearly make out the shape of the dog sitting facing forward, and very briefly, I saw those same glowing eyes. I kept my conversation going to keep myself from freaking out, but as soon as I got home, I went inside and locked the door. The very next day, my mom called me and told me that my great aunt was going to pass very soon. I didn't know what to think. Is the black dog a harbinger of death? Am I really gifted, or am I just nuts and like to jump at shadows? Please, help me out on this? I think I was saved by a hellhound. I've never shared anything on Reddit before, but for most of my life, I've been sort of a supernatural magnet. My friend has been encouraging me to share some of my stories on here. I might post this one on a few different places though, just to see if it sparks any interest. I'm not ever going to use any real names in my stories. Let's pretend my name is Faye. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was still in high school. At the time, I was really close friends with a guy, let's call him Jason. I had recently told Jason about how a lot of things happened to me that are difficult to explain. We kinda got talking about my different encounters, and he asked me, seemingly hesitantly, if I had ever seen a demon. I said that I didn't think anything quite so sinister has ever crossed my path. Jason then explains to me that his mom has been worried that something strange was happening in their house. She said she had gotten sudden chills, heard some strange noises, and had been feeling uneasy in general in the house lately. Now, at this point, I had exactly zero experience with demons or anything of the sort, so I was not aware there was anything to really worry about. I told Jason I would come over that weekend to see if anything felt out of the ordinary. A few nights later, my phone lights up at 4 in the morning. It's Jason. He says I need to come over ASAP, that something wasn't right. He said he'd been hearing scratches in the walls and had dismissed it as a squirrel or something until that night, when the scratches suddenly started knocking. He said he could swear it was like someone was knocking rhythmically from inside the walls. I was at his house by sunrise. I was preparing myself for the worst when I got to his house. The only thing I knew about demons was what I'd seen in the movies. I was ready for head spinning and projectile vomit. When I got there, it was nothing. I felt nothing. Everything seemed completely normal. I went all over the house, put my ear to the walls. I even checked out the creepy basement. I felt nothing strange or sinister. I didn't want to make Jason feel like an idiot, so I just gently assured him that whatever was there was gone now, and that he didn't have anything to be afraid of. Secretly, I thought he had just over-exaggerated the whole thing. We all left the house for the day. Later that evening, I was back at his house for dinner. His parents went to bed, and we were in his living room downstairs, talking about nothing in particular. The conversation eventually shifted naturally over to his mother's suspicions. We were talking about the scratching and knocking in the walls, and we were kind of joking around about it. You know that feeling when you're talking about something that you really know you shouldn't be talking about? The conversation just felt off suddenly. I felt wrong for talking about it. Just a general feeling of uneasiness all around. I abruptly changed the subject. I eventually headed home around 11 p.m. Jason lives pretty far out of town, in a heavily wooded area. I was maybe halfway home, and suddenly, unexplainably, horrifyingly, a feeling hit me like a brick wall. This white-hot rage came over me. It's difficult to describe. It was like I passed through a fog, and on the other side, I had come out homicidal. Something was in Jason's house, and it had followed me home. I don't believe I was possessed because I remember it all. It was definitely me. I was just this cocktail of aggression. Then, in the middle of the road, I saw what I thought at first was a wolf. The closer I got to it, the more I realized it wasn't an animal I had ever seen before. It had all the physical traits of a dog or wolf, but it was so much bigger. It had wild black fur, and its teeth were bared. It looked simultaneously ragged and enormous. It was abnormally low to the ground. That's when I realized it was crouching. It made a dead sprint for my car, and I was too close to it to slow down in time. I knew the size of this animal would likely total my car. I braced myself for a crash. I braced and waited and opened my eyes. And it was gone. So was whatever had followed me home. I've told this story to a few of my friends, and they all agree that it sounds like the dog I'd seen was a hellhound, and it was looking for whatever had followed me home, and took it back to wherever it came from.